In the West, we like to think that all our politicians are dishonest and they're just in it for themselves. But here's an interesting question. Do you really want your politicians to be honest with you? Or do you want them to be electable? This is something that British politics struggles with a lot, and in particular the Labour Party. I know something about them, so we're going to be examining this question through that lens, but it's obviously applicable to just about any democracy. We're going to be examining exactly what electability means. But first, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Labour, let me bring you up to speed. British politics used to have two big parties, the Conservatives, or Tories, who were more right-wing, and Labour, who were more left-wing. They used to have very different approaches to economics. Then in 1994, Tony Blair became leader of the Labour Party, and Labour changed its economic vision to more or less just agree with the Conservatives about economics. And under Tony Blair, the Labour Party won 3 general elections in a row. So Labour's approach to economics since Blair has been quite right-wing. But here's the twist. The left-wing element of the party never really went away, it just got suppressed for a while. Now, it's back, and the party has a new leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who is socially and economically left-wing. Jeremy Corbyn was elected to the leadership position by party members with a bigger mandate than any other Labour leader ever, and party membership has massively increased under him. There are those in the party who believe that this resurgence of the left-wing is a terrible idea. It's complicated by the fact that a lot of the people who think that are the MPs themselves, or those near the top of the party machinery. Helped by various private corporations, notably the PR firm Portland Communications, they are trying everything they can to get rid of Corbyn. They believe that he is unelectable. Although I should say that not all criticism of Corbyn comes from that position. So what is electability? Obviously it's more than just popularity, because among the Labour members and those who are joining the party, Corbyn is very popular. But electability does contain some practical assumptions about who will win an election. The Labour right say that you've got to be in power and have people vote for you if you want to do any good, and if you want people to vote for you, you've got to tell them what they want to hear. Or in the party parlance, you've got to address real concerns. In the present day, it's not just right-wing economics that's popular in the UK. Socially right-wing ideas are starting to become fashionable too, particularly intolerance of immigrants. Some people believe that the UK's economic problems are caused by immigrants putting strain on things like houses, hospitals and schools. The Labour right think that you've got to indulge people's worries about immigration and more or less agree with the Conservatives' approach to economics, because that's what Blair did and Blair won. But that is not how Corbyn rolls. The Labour right want to tell people, yes, immigration is a problem and we need to fix it. The Labour left would rather educate people about immigration, so they can ask themselves, why aren't there enough houses for everyone? Why aren't hospitals being funded enough for everyone? Why aren't schools being funded enough for everyone? Because the answer to that is that the economic consensus of the last 30 years that the Labour Party actually supported, well, turns out it's very good for the rich and not so good for everyone else. It's not just economics and immigration though. This tension applies to things like defence. When a terrorist attack happens, do you tell people the myth that they expect to hear? That terrorism is caused by people who hate you and military action will fix it? Or do you tell them what is actually the truth, according to terrorism experts? That terrorism is caused by a very complex web of factors, some of which we contribute to, and that military action will likely make it worse? Or crime. Do you get tough on crime because you think voters might like that? Or do you try to design a justice system that will do the most good, including good for criminals? Do you tell people what they want to hear, or what they need to hear? The popular slogan, or the inconvenient truth? The Labour right think that you've got to play to your audience, and that it's no good being morally pure if you don't get elected. As a friend of mine on the Labour right said to me recently, rhetoric doesn't put food on the table. They believe this despite the fact that Labour tried going right under Ed Miliband in the last election and failed, and they believe it despite the fact that David Cameron indulged people's worries about immigration with a referendum on the EU and it bit him in the ass. And here we're starting to come up against our first snag. If electability involves practical assumptions about who will win an election, then that could be a problem, because it's actually bloody difficult to predict who's going to win an election, and even bloody difficult to understand why people who won past elections won them. Like I said before, Labour tried going right under Ed Miliband and failed. People predicted that it going left again under Corbyn would wipe it out, but Labour's been winning by-elections with an increased share of the vote. There's a widespread assumption that being more right-wing or centrist helped the party win under Blair, but that might not have been what really caused it, or it might not have been the only thing. There are a million polls and surveys and approval ratings you can look at to try and figure out what people will vote for, but in a sea of polls you can't help but focus on the ones that support what you already think. And it's worth mentioning that polls can be very inaccurate. All the polls in the last general election predicted it was going to be very close, and it wasn't. Labour got creamed. The practical dimension of electability is a minefield, because in order to really know for sure who is electable, you would need to be able to predict the future. And it's doubly difficult for Labour. Labour has traditionally marketed itself as the party of the working class, but people's view of what the working class is and will vote for can be very skewed. It's worth remembering that migrants and people of colour are disproportionately members of that class, so pandering to empire nostalgia and xenophobia may not go over well with them. When making calculations about what people will vote for, you've got to remember not to erase large swathes of people. But the concept of electability doesn't just contain practical assumptions. It contains moral assumptions too. When politicians entertain an idea, they give it legitimacy. Case in point, the EU referendum. A lot of the discussion leading up to the referendum played on people's worries about immigration and foreigners. Since the Brexit vote, there's been a massive increase in racial hate crime against people who are, or are just perceived as, foreign. And that's millions of people who are afraid to ride the bus alone now, or whose homes and businesses have been destroyed, or who've been spat at and insulted in the street. Brexit unleashed a tidal wave of racial hatred. A lot of people were already distrustful of foreigners, and for some, all they needed was an excuse. Not all disrespect leads to racial violence, but all racial violence starts with disrespect. And when we, or our politicians, feed that disrespect, we fan the flames. So the idea of electability, insofar as it means going right, contains the moral assumption that those who suffer as a result of that are acceptable casualties. You say that their suffering is a necessary sacrifice to winning the election, assuming that you will in fact win it on that platform, and you promise to turn around and fix everything for them when you get in power. But it's all well and good saying that a politician needs to be electable if you're not the one who will be deported or killed in the meantime. That's why a lot of people on the left of the Labour Party think that it shouldn't abandon those who arguably need it the most. That moral seriousness cuts both ways though. If you stick to your principles and lose the election, then your opponents are going to get in and they might kill people. It's not true that the opposition is completely powerless in British politics. They can sometimes have an absolutely crucial influence, but they have a lot less influence than winning would get them, certainly. So to sum up, there's a lot of pressure on politicians to believe what they think they need to believe in order to be electable. And what exactly electable means will depend on your personal politics, your ability to predict the future, the reliability of your information, your ability to imagine and empathize with groups of people who aren't necessarily like you, and which human beings you think it is morally acceptable to sacrifice. So do you play it straight, or do you try and stack the deck? Either way, you're gambling with other people's chips, so how do you do that responsibly? I know what my answer to this is. It's why I support the politicians that I do. You're going to have to think about what your answer is, and then act on it. Subscribe for more videos about philosophy from me. At patreon.com/philosophytube, you can help keep the show alive and help me give away more free education on YouTube.